Hello and welcome to Round Robin. I'm your host, Robin McCormick with the City of Hampton. And today we have our parenting expert, Alvean Lyons, and we're going to talk about developmental transition in our kids and what we as parents need to do to adjust our parenting style to meet those transitions. Welcome back, Alvean.
Thanks, Robin.
This sounds like a fun topic.
It can be. It can be.
You know, it's hard though because transitions mean change.
Which is scary to most people.
It is.
Oh,
it
definitely.
is parents and kids.
Oh, definitely. And when you're talking about going from a place where you completely are there for your kids and your kids are very receptive to you being there for them, to moving eventually to a place where you really have to set them free to be independent adults.
Well, as you know, we both went through that this year. Our kids are in college.
We certainly
shipped
did.
them off.
And I thought about that when I saw what it was that we were going to talk about today. I was like, wow, this is a transition we have gone through completely. And now I have one that's married. So, I mean, it literally is the ultimate transition to really let your kids go. So we really want to talk to parents about how to do that as effectively as possible. And there's no perfect way. So let's say that up front. Every child is different.
Right.
You may notice with some of your younger ones that it takes a little bit longer for them, especially if it's the baby child. They're used to having their older siblings. They're used to having someone kind of speak for them sometimes. All of those things do affect the way in which they will transition. So we do have some of those kids who feel like they are going to do it a little slower than perhaps their older siblings did, and that's perfectly okay. But we have to recognize that they're still going to have to go through those stages. So one of the things that we talk about is the parenting continuum. So I know it sounds like a big term, but it's actually a very smooth concept and one that we as adults can relate to very well. Most of us have had times in our professional lives where we've had a supervisor, we've had a manager, and we've dealt with consultants. Well, if you think about the parenting continuum and in connection with what it looks like for children, in your early stages where your kids are in K through 5, your elementary school years.
Okay, so we're skipping the toddlerhood stuff because we know what that's like.
Exactly. They're totally dependent on you during that point.
100%.
So we're really talking about once we hit those early school age through adulthood.
Okay.
So at that K through 5 age, we're really supervisors in our children's lives. We're very hands-on. We're kind of looking over their shoulder to make sure that the things that they need from us, we're able to give to them as we're teaching them various things, that they really get it. We don't just, step back and let them do it completely on their own. We really are involved in that process. And much like your supervisors would be at work, those are typically your first line of defense. Those are the people that you're going to immediately when something goes wrong, when you need to understand what needs to be done or adjusted. That's that kind of relationship. And for parents, it's sometimes the most comfortable relationship we have with our kids, because that is the point in which we get to be as involved as we want to be.
But then some people want to be more involved. Like, you want to control what the child wears, you want to put the child's clothes on, you want to do things for the child, and you have to step back and start letting them make those choices.
Absolutely.
Learn to do it themselves, learn to tie their shoes. And you know what? It takes a long time.
It does. It really does. And it's frustrating. It's hard for us too sometimes, particularly if we don't want them to grow up just yet. So when they are trying to establish that independence, we find ourselves fighting against it a bit too, because we're still thinking you are our baby.
Right.
But the truth is that while they are our babies, they have to be able to function independent of us when they leave us every morning. When they go out into the world, we have to make sure that they're capable of doing that, even though they may be between age 5 and age 12. It still has to happen.
You have to let them do it, and you have to accept that it is going to take longer.
Absolutely.
A lot of times than you doing it. And the outcome isn't always as pretty
as you want it to be. And do know that it's going to be a lot of trial and error. What might have worked for your earlier child may not work for your second child or your third child or your fourth, however many you may have. So you are going to have to constantly adjust. We're tweaking on a regular basis as parents. But do understand that because we are sending them to school, they have to function independently at school. The teachers cannot give to them the same level of attention that we give to them at home. So it's very important that we are letting them develop their own footing as they're growing. So the first stage is really the supervisor stage, or the dependent stage, so to speak. The second stage would be your managerial stage. If you think about it yet again in terms of work, the manager is not the first person that you typically go to. Your manager knows what's going on because they kind of look to the supervisors to give them that information.
Okay.
But they are really only involved in that process when they need to be pulled into the process. So now we're looking at our kids at that middle school going into high school stage, the early high school stages. So now I have taught you a great deal during your 5 to 12 age range. Now I'm looking to see you be able to implement those things without me being actively involved in that. Now, as a parent of a middle schooler at home, that's a very interesting stage. Yes, and it can be even more challenging when you're dealing with boys, because my middle schooler is a boy. And so he's not into the attention to detail.
Really?
At all, okay? So I find myself constantly reminding him, you're 13. You're gonna have to be able to do A, B, C, D on your own, having to talk to the teachers and expecting that he would be able to communicate that information to me at home without me having to send the email to get that same information.
Right.
Because you're expecting a certain level of independence or interdependence by the time you get to those middle school ages, and certainly as you send them into their early years in high school. I mean, we just can't do the same things we used to do in elementary school and call the teacher up every 5 minutes.
Right, you forgot to write down your homework assignment. I'm sorry, I'm not going to cover for you this time. You're going to have to learn to do it yourself and write it down in your book every single day.
Absolutely, and experience
or at least have a backup plan. Who is the friend that you call if you forget?
And have some of those mechanisms in place that say that here's what I need to do, much like you just pointed out, and if I don't do these things, here are the natural consequences that come from that.
That's right.
And one of the mistakes that we can make during those stages is we protect them from those consequences, which ill prepares them as they come into their young adulthood.
Yeah, I've had a hard time with that.
And it's tough.
It is.
Because we really want to save them from, falling through the cracks.
Sure.
But sometimes they have to stumble a little bit in order for them to realize that if I don't do A, then B is going to happen. And for us as parents, we don't want B to happen. We just really don't want to see it take place. But they need to have those experiences. So we don't sit back and let them drown. But you do have to sometimes let them get a little water in their nose. So they recognize that I need to be a little more careful as I do these things and a little more thoughtful. So that middle stage is our managerial stage or your interdependent stage. That's where I am there when needed, but I step back enough so that you learn to ask for help when you need help, as opposed to me stepping in and providing that for you before you've even learned how to say, hey, I'm in trouble. So that stage can be one of the trickiest of the stages.
I think it is hard. I think it's very hard.
It is, because we want a lot from people that have bigger bodies, but have not developed completely in terms of maturation either. And then the final stage would be what we call the consultant stage. That's the stage you and I just finished and have, or I should say, are going into at this point.
I don't think you quite let go just because they're 18. It's hard.
And that's true. And that's sort of why we call it the consultant stage, because when we think about that in terms of business, that's when you are invited in to the process. You can't just step in as a consultant to the city. It is not in my right to decide what's going to happen overarching in any project, but rather it's by invitation that I come in to do what it is that is needed by the community or needed by the city. So the same thing is very similar in the lives of our children, that as they come into their adulthood, we are then there by invitation, which I have to tell parents all the time makes those first two stages even more important. Because if you don't develop the kind of relationships with your kids in those earlier stages, when they need you, then you get to a place where they no longer want you involved in their lives. And that is the shift that takes place, because when they're young, they need to call on us. They cannot do it on their own. When they're older, we have to develop the kind of relationship that they want to call on us when they're in trouble. So all that plugging in we talk about all the time, the communication we talk about all the time, that is what lays the foundation for us to have the healthiest relationship when we get to the consultant stage or the independent stage.
Well, and that's the one too where I think if you don't do the manager part right, if you are if you either let go too soon or you're too, you know, I continue to use the term helicopter parent. But if you don't let go at all, then they're not going to invite you back because it's too frustrating to them because you jump in with both feet and both hands, and that's not the right answer.
That is so perfectly said, because what they really want is to know that you're there, you'll offer the information or the advice, but you will step back to let them make the decision for themselves how they're going to implement it, which for us, because we've seen it and been through most of it, we're already predicting the outcomes. So we kind of want to tell them what they should do.
Oh, it's killing me. It's killing me.
It's very difficult. It is very, very difficult. But when we talk about the idea of ready by 21, where the city, you know,
that's
the city's
right.
initiative
So good. 21. Mine's still 18.
Right. You still have a couple of years. But when we talk about that notion, the idea is to really take them to through that process, that whole continuum, in a very healthy fashion, so that when we get to that 21, we have created adults that are active and positive contributors back to their local communities. When we think about it as parents, that they are excellent contributors to the family, that we have good relationships, and no relationship is perfect. We're going to see things differently. We're different people with different perspectives, but we want it to be a positive relationship, you know, so that we can agree to disagree on things without it being frustrating and us trying to avoid each other on a regular basis.
And it's hard. I have a consultant story. So I go to visit my kid. I was dropping something off at college, and I said, can I come up and see your room? And he said, only if you promise not to touch anything and not to say anything about how messy it is. I'm like, oh, you know how hard that is? That's going to kill me. But I did it. And I went up, and you know, there was like, it was hard to navigate because there was stuff everywhere. And I said, okay, this is nice. I'll stand up because there's not really any room to sit.
Right.
And finally I said, can I take out your recycling and your trash? You know, I won't touch. He said, Mom, it's the first time in my life where I've put something down and it's where I left it. You know, nobody moves it. It's my space. My roommate and I know what's going on. And so we compromised, and I said, you know, just let me remove the trash a little bit. And he was like, that's good. I haven't had time to do that lately. Thank you. And we left on good terms, but it was hard. I mean, it was like I'm biting my fingers going, I want to organize this.
Right. I want to fix it. I want to clean it up. I want it to make sense.
The way it makes sense to him. And I tried to let go.
And it's not easy. It's not easy at all.
No.
Because you're thinking to yourself, what is growing in here that
I will say
nobody knows about?
But I was like, he's not going to be able to find anything under these piles and stacks and, you know, things that topple over when you walk by.
But for them, it's organized chaos.
And
makes
it is
perfect
learning
sense
to
them
what kind of organization he needs.
It's necessary.
Yeah.
So when you lose the paper or when you can't find your laptop, and now,
which we went through all of middle school, you know. And
now we have to deal with the consequences of those things. Those are all part of learning, because you will not be there during the first job. You will not be there to walk them through their entire career. All of those things in that kind of way. So we have to make sure that they are prepared to be adults. And what we do in those early stages have everything to do with what that end product is ultimately going to be. So you're so right in terms of recognizing the balance between being involved but not being overly involved to the point that it becomes handicapping.
Right.
So those transitions can be measured, and they come with all the social transitions also. When they were early in their years, we wanted to step in when they got into an argument with their friends.
Right.
We wanted to call the parents and say, hey, our kids have been friends for years. There's some stuff going on. We wanted to get involved in all of that. And at a certain age, that was appropriate. But there comes a point, even socially, that they have to work through their own conflict resolution. We have to talk them through some of those things. Absolutely.
Exactly. Do the role playing. How can you address this situation? What can you say to your friend?
In a positive way, even in dealing with a negative situation. How they're going to resolve those issues becomes extremely important. All of those are going to be necessary in their development. So we have to be able to transition with our kids as they transition.
Now, for people who don't have you in person to talk to, to provide these tips on a regular basis, Healthy Families offers some classes.
Fantastic classes. During that stage that we were talking about, the earlier stages, that 5 through 12, that is an excellent time to do the nurturing program, which really focuses on helping parents to develop those structures that are necessary for those healthy relationships and working through some of the tough stuff when our kids are trying to figure out how to stand on their own 2 feet. Then when we start talking about that managerial going into consultant phase, that is an excellent time to do connecting with your teens. We all need it. We've all gone through those stages.
I have heard too that that is such a good program for the teens, because they all get together and they do stuff in a separate room.
Absolutely. And they do
you
some
get
things
back
with the
with them
parents
at some
also.
point.
Absolutely.
But, they can share what's going on and also realize my mom's not the only bad mom. All moms do this, and I'm not alone in this boat.
Very true. Very true. And connecting with your teens is a fantastic class to be able to do. And then they have winning without fighting. And so that's going to come up too, which is really great when you deal with that power struggle that ultimately takes place as they're trying to become independent. And we are trying to let them go, but there's still some things they really need our hands involved in. So to make sure that that power struggle does not become something that has a lot of collateral damage, learning how to win without fighting is a really great program too. So there are some fantastic things that take you really through that entire continuum that we talked about.
That sounds great. And I do want to say, I think sometimes there's a stigma and people think, oh, I should be a perfect parent without having to go to class. Well, you know what? I had to take a training class to learn to use Microsoft Access. I had to take a class to learn to use different technology. I take supervisory. I'm in a workshop now where we work on our communications with staff and how to do things at work. And so if we know that we need that ongoing training, even if all it does is focus us on what we're doing, then we have to realize we as parents might need that as well.
And there's nothing wrong with us.
It doesn't mean we're bad.
At all. Or deficient
sharpening our skills
in any way. And quite frankly, even with what I do for a living, I'm always reading something, always studying something that I myself had to apply with my own kids. We're all working on being better. And there's nothing wrong with that process. The only thing that we could do wrong is know our kids need a better us and us choose not to develop those capacities. That is the only time we're a bad parent. But you are a great parent if you can identify some things that you need in terms of your growth and go out and get them so that your kids could be the healthiest selves they could possibly be.
And you could be a little less stressed too.
Absolutely.
I think that helps too, because otherwise everything's like all bottled up and you don't know what to do. And so having someone to offer tips and other parents to share this with, it's a liberating experience.
It's the whole notion. It takes a village to raise a child. And it really takes a village to support a family too. And it's one of the things I think Hampton does well.
Okay, well thank you, Alvean. I appreciate that.
Oh, absolutely.
And we'll have you back again soon.
That we will.
Okay. Thank you for watching. I hope you have learned a little bit about transitioning your parenting skills and teaching your child to become independent in really slow increments so that you're there as a safety net, but not always doing it for them. Thanks for watching.